Okay. Okay. Now, yes. So, teams are in constant pressure to deliver faster. Complexity has increased a lot, and with AI, our knowledge expires really, really fast. But despite of the conditions changing, most teams today are still designed for output, and learning is expected to happen on the side if there is time. Giving a throwback to the legendary tale of the hare and the tortoise, most teams are expected to function at the pace of a hare. They're optimized for delivery, velocity, predictability, whereas learning, while it perceives to slow people down, it requires reflection, safety, and experimentation. But what if the moral of the story was not about speed versus stillness? What if it was about sustainability? What if we could create spaces of focus within the pace where learning could grow and thrive? I started thinking about this because all the design leaders that I've worked with previously have always faced great emphasis on learning, but also when you take on a team, you promise them growth and opportunity, and you want to deliver on that particular promise. When learning isn't designed intentionally into a system, you promote this culture of heroes or stars who tend to silo and keep the information. And based on that, teams on the other parts of the team repeat mistakes. And innovation kinds of stagnates because the knowledge sharing is not then universal. Which is why I say learning is not a motivation problem, it's a system design problem. And we have to actively design learning into the systems that we build, into the teams that we grow to have it at a sustained pace. Over my experience across project agencies, big techs, and startups, I've always seen the same four conditions exist in a learning team. And if one of these conditions don't exist, then learning simply doesn't happen. And today, we'll talk about how we can actively design for safety, structure, shared language, and practice. Structure is like a container for learning. This is where learning lives. And when you stop having intentional structures in your daily cadence, learning becomes optional. When we scaled our design team from 3 to 12 designers, we faced two specific challenges. One was we saw a clear emergence of UX designers versus UI designers, and what we wanted for the design team was for them to be able to grow across the spectrum and pick up M and pie-shaped competencies as if they wish to do so. And the second was when we started working across different locations, collaboration didn't come as easily as before. Now, what I wanted to create was a space where designers could feel familiarity and reduce the first bar of friction between the entry point to learn these new techniques. And that's why on every last Friday of the month, we dedicated 1 hour to do something extremely powerfully simple. One designer from the team would speak to the other designers in the team about a topic of her choice. But what we did differently was, I used to choose the topic and I used to align it to the designer's core competency. We call this cocoon because we wanted to emphasize on transformation and tensions that came from evolving and stretching in directions that we have not explored before. And we could use templates like this for strength mapping, which would be self-evaluated by designers, or you could simply work with your individual experiences with each of the designers. But what I would really emphasize on is the growth model that you built in these sessions. You would want to really encourage designers to think of this as their unaltered space where they can be authentically themselves, not another pod for evaluation itself. And we did a lot of sessions, and all the topics are intentionally chosen to span the entire depth and breadth of the spectrum. And what that consequently did is made us think together as a team. Over the period in time that we did this, what happened is we saw specialist emergence from different parts of the design team and taking more ownership of that capability that they associated with. We also saw a lot of confidence in terms of how designers integrated with each other and tried to take this to practice in the practice boards that we set up, which I'll talk about next. So practice is where your learning that you introduce through all these channels turns into capability. And for us, Discovery Sprints was a great space where that could thrive and happen. They are highly ambiguous by nature. So designers could take these skills that they newly developed and try that in this new high ambiguous environments. For example, we did a cocoon on data-driven design, which directly translated into a very structured pre-work for one of our discoveries, which then drove the direction of the discovery itself. In the spirit of learning, we put all the designs that we did together and published a book on design sprints to communicate that learnings back into the wider community. So we introduced a learning culture into the organization, and we introduced practice words for that organizational culture to be practiced. But now we need reinforcements around, and that's where cadence comes in. Cadence is what turns intention into habit, and we have all been there. We do all of these to sustain learning and interaction within the team. But if there's one thing that I would really focus on, those are hackathons. So we do this as in our very high fast-paced environment. We do this as 1-hour sessions, where if any designer has an issue or a complicated problem to solve, they could come in and present that problem to the audience. And all the designers would jump on the single file and they would create all these designs and spin up multiple directions on the same go. And at the end of that session, what the designers effectively have is multiple directions to a complex design problem that they couldn't tackle on their own. And at the end of this, they have the flexibility to take that and make it however they want to. And this has helped us in multiple ways in collective thinking, where we have rethought interactions, sometimes gotten over our own content biases, and sometimes reimagine interactions altogether. I recently picked up with this book, which talks about mindset. You typically are said to have mindset as an individual trait, and you have either fixed mindset or growth mindsets, depending upon the person that you are. So in this book by Mary Murphy, she categorizes mindset as a pattern of the organization and challenges the idea that mindset is an individual trait. She says that mindset is a continuum, and depending on the conditions that you design within the organization, you can get individuals to travel from the fixed mindset culture to growth mindset culture, which she calls cultures of genius versus cultures of growth. And she has also identified different triggers which would actually make this transition happen. Now, if you look at learning, in all these situations, this is one of the accelerators to actually make this shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, which makes it fundamentally important. At DDX, we did this exercise to introduce psychological safety, which is the fourth pillar and the foundation of all things learning. So we did a paired activity where you had to find your pair and then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we made the exercise harder as it went. So you'd have to clap instead of 5, tap your feet instead of a multiple of 3, and so on and so forth. But the whole focus of the exercise would be on how you would perceive the difficulty of that challenge itself. Then we repeat the exercise, but then instead of focusing on the mistake, whenever you make a mistake, you'd throw your hands up in the air and say, hurrah! And the energy of the room completely changes because now you're celebrating a culture of mistakes rather than focusing on what you're doing, and you're celebrating the process. I did this exercise when I was in the Stanford Graduate School of Business last time, and Professor Sarah Soul, who was the dean of the GSB, she did this exercise, and that's how she introduced psychological safety. She also went on to talk about our scale of failures and how organizations treat failures. Now, if you look at the left side of this graph, that talks about trust issues. But on the right side is where actually learning lives, and we need to learn to encourage those behaviors and always celebrate the messenger. When all of these coexist, when there's no threatening to failure, learning becomes commonplace and people can think together as a team. And when that happens, teams just don't learn faster, and they fundamentally work together across all mistakes and challenges, which helps them innovate better. Thank you.